Hey, Vince, I got a question.
Oh, here we go. I get nervous every time you start it off like that.
Well, we were talking earlier, and you said that webinars were the main thing that helped you achieve your success. And you also said that you use frameworks.
Definitely.
So can you explain this?
Remember being a kid? Remember the story about the 3 little pigs?
Yeah.
Remember what happened to the first 2 pigs that didn't have a framework?
What happened?
They huffed, and they puffed, and they blew that mother down. You know, I would say there's really like 3 parts, right? Number 1, the reason why a framework is important is predictability. It speaks for itself. You know, when something is predictable, we just definitely feel more comfortable with it, right? We believe that it's going to work. We have certainty that it's going to work, and those are usually the things you need when it comes down to predictability. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is really, having a framework, it's like having a good recipe. Right? When you have a good recipe, you could be blindfolded, okay? The food is going to come out right, and things are going to be all good. And last but not least, it allows you to collapse time, man. When you have a structure, okay, you don't end up looking like me, having no hair and being bald and pulling your hair out trying to figure out things, because essentially you can get things done faster and more efficiently.
All right, so before we get into it, make sure to please hit that like button. All right,
please do.
Let's get back into it.
All right.
So what's the first one? Predictability. Break that down.
A lot of people that are in digital marketing, they've heard of the perfect webinar, right? It was a webinar framework or script created by the one and only Russell Brunson, right? Everybody, has probably seen that if you've used a webinar or a VSL, at least over the last few years. And in the beginning, what was interesting about that was when no one had ever heard of it or used that, we had to figure out, was this something that we were going to test? And the way Russell was able to get over that curve and get people to believe in that particular framework was his story that he told about how he created a webinar using this framework, selling ClickFunnels, right? Mm-hmm. So even after that, people started to say, okay, well, that might have worked for you, but does it work for other people, right?
Right.
So one of the things that ClickFunnels did was they created these awards, right? They created a 2 Comma Club award. And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, man, I got to get me one of those things. Well, Mike, guess what? I got me one of those things. And then he was like, hey, there's his 2 Comma Club X award. And guess what, Mike?
What?
I said I had to get me one of those things. And guess what, Mike? I got me one of those things.
That's right.
All right. So anyways, there's a lot of people, right, that have gotten 2 Comma Club awards and 2 Comma Club X awards using this framework. And what that did, by him having the story of using this webinar framework, was the first start of everybody starting to have this belief that it was possible. And then when everybody else started getting these awards using this framework, okay, then people had certainty that it would work for them. So that's why predictability is so powerful.
So number 2, you mentioned recipes.
Having the right recipe is important. And it's important to cooking. Yeah, it's important to life, right? I think something that needs to be said is just the amount of stress that gets put off of you by simply knowing that the outcome can happen if you just follow simple instructions.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. The other day, I was on YouTube because, I actually like to cook. Did you know I like to cook?
I mean, I tried a couple of your stuff.
I'm a master.
Debatable. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
I'm a master at finding recipes. I went on YouTube. I was gonna make homemade burgers. I was gonna try to cook one in a cast iron skillet.
Fancy,
right? And this video pops up with Gordon Ramsay, and he's like, basically showing how to make the perfect burger. Mm-hmm. Now, before I saw that, right, if I would have, come out here on this video and be like, I could make a burger that's better than Gordon Ramsay, you'd be like, oh no, you can't. Heck no, can you outcook Gordon Ramsay? But
right.
If I told you that I had the exact recipe of Gordon Ramsay's perfect burger, you'd probably believe me, especially if you were to believe that it was the exact recipe. There wasn't any little tricks. He wasn't sprinkling some secret sauce on his that I didn't have, right? He was doing the exact same thing that I was doing. You would be sure and certain that my burger would taste the same. Yeah. So anyways, I remember watching this video, right? I was about to make this burger, and he's like, you need to have your pepper. He's like, you need to have your salt. You need to put butter on it. And he told us the temperature, and it looked so great. I was like, man, I can't wait to cook this burger, right? So I ended up watching the entire video, made the burger, and it was amazing by simply following a recipe. So when you have a framework, right, and you combine it with what we just talked about, having predictability, right, it just increases your ability to finish what you started, which is creating this presentation, this webinar, to get great results. So that's why having a recipe is so important.
And number 3, you mentioned collapsing time. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, man. I mean, the last I checked, I'm not getting any younger. I remember when I was the young buck online, right? I don't have time to figure all these things out, right? So when you have the ability to collapse time, you get things done faster. And one thing I know is that money loves speed. So I'll give you an example of collapsing time, right? So think about, a franchise model, right? If you were to go out and try to create any type of business and start from scratch, we would all agree that you'd probably face more roadblocks and more hurdles trying to do that versus just going and getting that similar type of business, but in more of a franchise model, right? They would have all of the layouts, they would have, all of the blueprints and the resources and the tools to help you along the way get better results. So we would agree to that, right?
Yeah.
But to make it more real, I can give you a real life example of a billionaire that we all know and love, a guy named Magic Johnson, right? After Magic was done playing, his career ended early. He's like, what am I going to do? Like, what can I do? I've been in meetings with Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers. He's taught me a lot, but now I want to be a businessman. He had a choice. Everybody, knew Magic. He probably could have went out and started his own, fast food restaurant. He could have went out there and started his own coffee place, but no, he didn't do that. He went out there and he essentially bought into Burger King franchises, and he bought into Starbucks franchises, and he opened up hundreds of them in the inner cities to the point where they basically ended up buying all of them back from him, which was his launching pad to becoming a billionaire, to eventually owning a piece of the Lakers and obviously the Dodgers, and he continues to do amazing things.
Yeah.
All because he understood the power of collapsing time. So I think a lot of people, they get out there and they try to do all these things on their own. And, one of my biggest pieces of advice is, they say that you should learn from your mistakes. I definitely believe that, but I think a smarter thing to do would be to learn from other people's mistakes. So if they have franchise models and they've got blueprints and they've got the recipe and you've seen how predictability works, right? People getting results and the person that created it getting the results, there's no need to start off trying to figure things out on your own. And that's why frameworks, specifically with webinar and VSL type of frameworks, are so important to getting started in business.
All right, so this all makes sense, but for someone that needs a little bit more explanation, can you help break this down for them?
I think that if you step back, right, and you ask yourself, if I was in the zone, meaning I was on the phone and I was selling a product and service, and I said everything perfect. They asked me a question, they asked me an objection, and I handled it perfectly. Not only did they buy, they were excited. They were telling all their friends, they went on social media, and they posted about buying from you. Imagine if you could simulate that same situation on every single sale. So every single sale that you make was presented and done that very way. That's in essence what a webinar or VSL is. That's why it's so important.
Yep.
So having these frameworks allow you to put something in that same light that way each and every time. But more specifically, if you really look at it, you can go to one of my favorite movies of all time, The Karate Kid. In fact, we watched it recently over 4th of July weekend with my family. We watched
the new one.
The newer one with Will Smith's kid and Jackie Chan.
Jaden Smith.
Yeah, Jaden Smith.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's this scene in the movie when they move to China and they're in this new place and they're having some issues with their apartment. And Jaden walks in and he essentially throws his coat on the floor. And the version of Mr. Miyagi, his name was Mr. Han, played by Jackie Chan, sees Jaden throw his coat on the floor and his mom get mad. I'm telling him to pick it up. Anyhow, he ends up getting beat up and bullied, same thing as the original Karate Kid. And, Mr. Han saves him and he, asks him to train him and teach him karate, right? So during the first, time they get together, he's like, okay, teach me. We're gonna have our first class. Come over to the my place. We're gonna start learning karate. And for the first month or 2 months, however long the time lapse in the film, all they do is essentially have Jaden drop his coat, pick his coat up, hang it on this rack, put the coat on, take the coat off, drop the coat, pick the coat up, hang it on the thing, blah, 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 blah. This goes on and on and on, right? To the point where eventually at some point, Jaden comes back and he's like, hey, Mr. Han, what the heck is this? I thought I was gonna be learning karate. This ain't karate. I understand, I get the point. Be more respectful. He's thinking of something else, right? He's not even thinking that he's learning karate, which, by the way, I think is an important lesson in itself, because sometimes when you're learning frameworks and people are telling you certain things to do, you don't get it. You don't see why that's important. For me, that thing was like personal development. when I got started, I just wanted the like X's and O's, teach me how to make money. But when things get tough, if you don't have the inner game, you're gonna quit. That's an example of like what he was going through, thinking he was trying to teach him to be respectful, which he was, but he was actually teaching him karate. So anyways, this argument continues to happen till finally he goes, come here. And he just starts hauling off on him, throwing all these punches. And just in a reactionary way, Jaden's blocking everything and hitting him and doing all this stuff. And he's at the end of the scene, he's literally looking at his hands like, what the heck did I just do? These hands are deadly weapons. Like I could, kill a man in 5.2 seconds, right? So that is the example of a framework, right? Because what happens is the more you do it, the better you get at it. So for example, my first webinars, as I talked about earlier, were horrible. But now I've got a framework that works. It's predictable. I believe it works. And it continues to make money. So that's why I would encourage every single person to get a webinar or VSL framework.